webinar around sustaining online learning. My name is Alan Dugan. I'm Global Head of Education here at 3P Learning, and today we really want to spend some time talking a little bit around what it means to sustain online learning in such unpredictable and unprecedented times. We're going to try and talk about three buckets today, and we're going to try and talk about how we kind of maintain continuity, and try and have a conversation about assessment. I'm going to try and give some ideas around approaching remote learning and teaching, and some ideas about how or what you might do. I'm joined today by one of the education specialists in the 3P Learning team, Beverly Mccormack. I will let Beverly introduce herself. She's joining us from a sunny Northern Ireland this morning for her, this afternoon for us. So I'll let her introduce you, and then I'll frame up our conversation a little bit more.
Good morning, everyone. Really pleased that you are able to join us today, and we appreciate that you've given up some of your time to be with us. So we really hope that you will benefit from our session today. As Alan has said, my name is Beverly Mccormack. I am based in Northern Ireland. I've been a teacher here for about 17 years and just recently joined the 3P team. As a teacher, I worked in primary schools in the primary setting, so I've experience right across what would be from our primary 1 through to primary 6, and some experience of primary 7. Some of my interests in when I was teaching were the use of STEM subjects and IT to prepare students for learning opportunities online, and here we find ourselves in that very situation today. So I hope I can bring some nuggets of information to you, some things to help you think, maybe to challenge you in your situations in your school. And again, thank you for joining us today.
So we would love to hear a little bit from you. The purpose of these webinars is not to stand here and give you all the answers, because we don't have them, quite frankly. What we do have is we have visibility. We have an opportunity to see what's going on around the world. So we've got Beverly in the UK and a whole host of other members of the team in different parts of the world. And so we get some visibility. I get the privilege of being able to speak to schools, school leaders, teachers on a daily basis across Australia and across the world. And so what we do have is a little bit of insight, a little bit of visibility about what other people are doing and what solutions might work. But we don't have the answers. And so the purpose of today is to really bring connection, is really to bring an opportunity to bring some ideas that you might not have heard or might not have had up until now, or even answer some questions and really kind of bring some insight in that way. So we really don't want this. I don't have a script in front of me. You'll hear that from the number of ehs that I say and or ums that I say as I speak. I don't have a script in front of me. We have a rough idea of what we'd like to talk about and how we'd like to do it, but we really want to be guided by you. So please use that question section as a question section on your dashboard. Please use that question section to drop in any questions or ideas or thoughts, because the way that we make this most useful to you is by hearing what's front of mind for you. One of the things that used to frustrate me as a teacher in the classroom is going to PD sessions that were not helpful or useful. And so the last thing that Beverly and I want today is for this to be something that's not useful for you. So I know that a few of you have had some problems with sound. I hope that that's been sorted now. What I'd love to do is start off by hearing where you're from and what you're teaching at this point in time. So why don't you start off by dropping into the question box. Tell me who you are, tell us who you are and where you're from and what you teach, what age group you teach at this point in time. And that will give us a good idea of who we've got in the room and what we're speaking to today. And as you do that, I will apologise or explain the candle that's just over my left shoulder. I have now been working from home for a long time. At some point, March 4 or 5 was the last time I was in the office. And my kids, I've got 3 kids. I've got a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 6-year-old, and they have been on and off remote learning. They're currently on school holidays, and my 6-year-old daughter this is the holiday where she's become obsessed with candles. So she decided, when I said that I needed a little bit more silence in the house for a webinar this afternoon, she decided that I needed a candle just to make it look perfect. So I don't want to squash her little heart by blowing that candle out, but I just feel like it's important to explain that, or to maybe even justify it. But would you want to explain anything in your background?
It's just gone 7:30 in the morning here. It is actually a beautiful day for Northern Ireland. We normally have a lot of rain. I'm even in short sleeves, so it's quite warm. It is our summer. I think it's about 14 degrees. So that is short and t-shirt weather for us. I know you guys probably would be wearing a coat in weather like that. And in the background, I do apologize if you can hear snoring. My 12-year-old, 8-year-old, and husband are all still asleep and probably will be for the next little while. So if there are alarms buzzing, I do apologize. We've also been homeschooling or attempting to homeschool. You know, as a teacher, you'd think this was easy, but when you're working full time, and I have been working from home as part of my job, but my husband has now been working from home since March, and my two kids have been attempting some sort of education under my watchful eye. So it has been quite a chaotic household for the last number of months, and it's officially our summertime here, so kids have finished up for the summer, but it does feel like they've been on summer vacation since mid-March, and it's a long time until September.
Coming though, it's coming. So we've got a huge number of people that have been brave to jump on and tell us who they are and where they're from. We've got the vast majority of people dialed in today are from Victoria, Melbourne and surrounding, and we've got a selection of primary and secondary. We've got some grade 4, grade 1, 2, some state and independent schools, and I think I want to welcome you all and I want to thank you all for coming, and I suspect that the vast majority of you that are dialed in today have come in because you're faced with another bout of online learning and teaching. And I think as we talk about it and as we reflect on it, we're facing another period of uncertainty in Australia but globally in terms of what it looks like to deliver our education in the next little while. We know that there are some schools in lockdown. We know that there's some schools that are now remote for prep through grade 10. I've heard of a few schools today that have made decisions to go remote from P through 12. I know of a few other plans and kind of emerging things. I think one of the things that I want to ask you, Beverly, what you think we've learned from the first time round, or what should be front of mind first time round. But before I do, I think one of the things that we are all in the education kind of world coming to terms with is that there's probably not going to be a really quick fix to this journey. It's not going to be going to home or online learning for 10 weeks and then we can go back to school and everything will go back to normal. It looks like we're going to have to adopt some sort of hybrid model for the foreseeable future until there's a vaccine and we're going to see spikes and troughs. And I know that for every teacher out there and for every parent out there, there's a sinking heart that has the unpredictability of it. And so I think it's probably firstly really helpful for us to start off and go, what do you think we've learned, Beverly, from the first time around? What do you think was the key learnings from that first session of online learning and teaching?
Well, for us here, teachers were literally thrown in at the deep end over the weekend. They left school on a Friday not to return on the Monday. The resources were in school. We have, as teachers, we have storerooms full of resources, and very few maybe are kept at home. And it really was a go fast attitude here. Teachers were trying to pack everything in. Many of them were not familiar with teaching online or even preparing an online environment for learning. So they really were on a rapid uphill climb in terms of trying to set up some sort of classroom for their children or for their pupils. And there was a lot of burnout amongst teachers in the UK here because they had so much ground to cover in such a short space of time. So one of the things I think that here we have learned is that we need to now go at a slower pace. It's about the quality of learning, not the quantity. For me, I had to go into my daughter's school, she's 8 years old, and collect learning packs. And I commend the teachers for putting together those resources for her. But the reality was I was working full time, my husband was working full time. Most of that work was not covered, which is, it's a sad thing that a teacher cannot cover the work. I should be in a better position to be able to do that with my daughter, but I physically didn't have the time, and it was reams and reams and reams of paper. It was death by worksheet. My daughter was bored, I was bored. So we set those aside, and we did practical activities, and we enjoyed being outdoors when the weather was good. So I think, learning from what has worked and what has not worked is going to be a huge thing. We talk about being a reflective practitioner. We talk about learning from experiences and adapting, and I think that is going to be a core part of what becomes of the environment moving forward for teachers. So think about, what worked, what didn't work. Many teachers here we've learned have built up really good professional online learning communities. Many of them have just been teachers who've wanted to set up a network on Twitter or LinkedIn or some other platform, whether that's Microsoft tools or Google tools, but they have invited other teachers in. So we have great networks in the UK here now of geography teachers. We have great networks of teachers who specialise in working with children with additional needs or special needs or English as second language, and they've really pulled their resources together. Now, obviously, there can be resource overload, but with the right attitude of looking there and connecting with teachers, finding out what worked or how to overcome one particular problem, that has been very effective. Teachers have also learned here that they need to look after themselves better. I mentioned a little bit of burnout, and teachers were available 24/7. They were trying to do the best online lessons. They were trawling the internet for resources, and they were just burning themselves out. They had no beginning or end to their school day, and that's something when you're working from home is really important, that you define your working day, that you know when it starts, when it ends, and you learn to switch off. And so a lot of teachers were struggling with that. One teacher I was speaking to in my local city here was telling me she was answering questions online to her student at 3:30 a.m. because the girl was struggling with her subject area, couldn't get online to the particular platform that the school was using. And this teacher felt that it was her duty to support her students in whatever way they needed. And absolutely, but maybe 3:30 in the morning wasn't the best time for both students and teacher. So it's important to sort of define your working conditions and your working day as well.
I think that's
those
really
sort of would be
important.
some of the main things that we have looked at.
Yeah. Sorry, Bev, I either just lost me or I've just lost you. Now you're back. Yeah, I would agree. I think one of the most fundamental things that you said there, and a few people have highlighted in the chat, Paula commented on the importance of team. So the importance of team, as teachers, we are completely used to being in the staff room, and some of the best ideas, some of the best shared practice, some of the best things come out of those coffee chats at lunchtime or in recess. And so the team is really important, and connecting with the team using some online tools is fundamentally important. I think the other one that you picked up on indirectly that I think for me is probably the biggest walk away, and it comes down to the journey we've done. We've done some hard work in that first phase, okay? And by hard work, I talk about managing expectations primarily. So I think we all went into first phase with this unwritten expectation that came from ourselves as teachers, but also from the parents that said, we need to fill a school day. We need to give enough work that will take that student from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. or whatever our school day is. And for your school, that was a work pack that had worksheets. For my daughter, who's in prep this year, that was exactly the same. We had sheets and sheets of paper coming out of our ears, and all of a sudden the value that was added to the learning was not as good as it might have been. And that's not being critical of the school, that's not being critical of anyone. That's me kind of reflecting on what we did. We went, oh, we need to give enough. We need to give enough to fill a school day, and actually we don't. And Paula said in the chat, the question part, that the key, one of the learnings for her was, it was a huge learning curve, learned that keeping instruction simple was important, making it as accessible as possible for all, and more contact with parents than ever before. And I've said this, if you've been in our webinars before, I don't apologise for saying this, but we've, over and over again, we've been on this journey of parents as partners in the learning journey. It's been a buzzword in curriculum documents and improvement agendas, and all of these conversations for the last 5 years. We've seen more and more of this phrase of parents as partners in the learning journey. And this journey has forced us to actually make that happen. Not just us, but them. We see parents in the news and the media, parents that we talk to, have more of an appreciation than ever before for the job of teachers. And so there's a real opportunity for us to really think about how we harness the hard work that we did, because there was a whole lot of heavy lifting in that first phase. There was a whole lot of potential burnout. There was a whole load of hard work, and I know, speaking to teachers over this last 10 days, there's that kind of, oh no, not again. How on earth do we do it? And I know, speaking to the state of California in the US has just announced that it's going to start the new school year remote, and speaking to some teachers up there just this week, and there's that sense of, I don't know if I can do it. And I think what I would say firstly is, you're not doing it again, you're doing something different. You're going to change, you're going to modify your practice, you're going to learn from it, and you're going to move forward in a way. And I think so many of our challenges can be solved or learned from what we did first time around. And I think let's call out the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is equity of technology, equity of access, and equity of support, right? That's the challenge in all of this. And that's going to be our biggest challenge in everything. But that's a challenge that we had in our classrooms. That was a challenge that we had when we were in our classrooms. How do we differentiate to meet the needs? How do we get parents on board to support? It's absolutely a challenge, and it's going to continue to be a challenge. I love this quote from Vero Chase on Twitter. Equity in education doesn't mean doing nothing for anyone, because we don't yet know how to do everything for everyone. And if we think about our classrooms, that's what they've been like. We haven't been paralysed and not done anything because we're not ready to do it for everyone. We've differentiated, and I think the same ought to be true and should be true as we move forward. And we've grown in our relationship with parents. We've grown in managing their expectations of what work they should have in front of them. We've grown in a whole host of ways. And so as we start to think about how we maintain continuity of education, I think what we ought to think about is what does it look like to prioritize the learning, and what learning is it that I'm trying to prioritize? And I'm just worried that my connection is a little bit poor at the moment. So Beverly, can you still hear and see me?
I can indeed. I've just been reading through some of the comments, and there are some fantastic comments coming in. It's great to actually read that some schools are very aware of, even some of the comments that I have said, some of our learnings. I think it was Maria there had mentioned that her school is giving a well-being day, and that's a fantastic gesture. That's and it's a meaningful gesture that schools can actually accommodate that, to allow teachers to have time with their family, or to go and do those jobs. So often as a teacher, you went to school, you did your work, but you went to the shop on the way home to buy your groceries, or you were doing other tasks en route, and that even that situation has been taken away from us now, and because it is so hard to switch off whenever you are in the middle of a task, or say a parent calls you, or you're in the middle of developing a worksheet or an online activity, or even recording a video. Let's face it, I've had to record videos for work, and it's not just one take. It takes about 6.5 hours to do a 20-minute video, and that's not even putting in, talking about the time that you prepare, and then you watch yourself back and you realize how many ums and ahs you did, and you either want to edit it or you want to start it over again. So it has been a very strenuous time for teachers, a very different strenuous time. So the fact that schools are aware of that and giving time back to teachers is fantastic. It's great to hear.
Yeah, and I think, I would agree, Stephen. Another great comment from Stephen is the professional relationships he was able to build with parents through remote learning was amazing. And I think we've got that foundation already there. We know what's worked, we know what hasn't worked. And there's been some questions around worksheets and how we prepare those resources. And I think, and I do want to go on to that to make sure we answer those 3 key points that we said we would. But in terms of maintaining continuity and in terms of thinking about how we actually do things, I think it's about thinking about the needs of the learning that we want to happen, first of all. So I think often, I know that I've been guilty of thinking about it in different ways and thinking about how I can differentiate the work for the student rather than provide the right work for a student. And maybe I'm being a little bit subtle in what I'm saying there, but I think some of these subtleties really help us to think about what we're trying to achieve. So for me, for example, if we start back at the curriculum, yeah, we all have absolutely a requirement, a professional requirement to meet all the outcomes, to meet all the standards, to cover and teach all the standards. But let's be honest, every single one of us in our classroom gives a varying degree of, places a varying degree of importance and priority onto different elements of those outcomes because we know what's more important than others. And I'm not, please don't hear me be critical of curriculum documents. I can do that somewhere else at another time, and we all can. But really what I'm saying here is that we know what to place importance on and what not to. And so that drives what we're trying to achieve. But I think there's a real importance in providing the right work for the students and thinking about those students first, particularly when we are not there to do what we do best, which is that kind of intervention, the right help at the right time, come along, understand where they're at. And the big challenge is knowing where the students are at if this goes on for a long time. But I do think that really what we need to be thinking about is how do we provide the right work? Once we provided the right work, then we can think about that differentiation and how we can personalize it a little bit more. So for me, I've been doing a little bit of work in research in the last little while around personalization and differentiation and that difference there. And the personalization is making sure that it is the right bucket of work for that student at that right time, addressing learning styles and needs and so on. Differentiation is tailoring it, is making it specific, is giving a scaffold to help or taking something out. And that's maybe oversimplifying that conversation, but there's certainly a difference between providing the right work and what we then call differentiation. And I think that's fundamentally really important. So really start to think about, to maintain continuity, we want to think right at the start, what's the important learning that we want to happen? And then how can we make it happen in a way that is really supportive of the parents and the students? How can we use the resources that we have? How can we do it? And I think there's a host of things I would say in that, but selecting the right resource is really important, and thinking about the difference in available resources at home versus school. Would you agree with that, Beverly?
Absolutely. And I think, you talk about personalisation of learning. That's something that is not necessarily talked about in the UK that much here. And the assumption is that by differentiating work, you are personalising the learning. So, and as you say, it is a subtle difference, but it's a huge difference at the same time. And quite often we are just tasked with delivering the curriculum. In the UK, we are quite fortunate here that our curriculum is set in levels, but in a way it can be a sliding scale. So it's up to the teacher to provide the right type of work, as you've mentioned, for the students. So, you know, if the foundations of a particular subject or learning area are not there, then the teacher has to find a way to discover where those pockets of or those areas where students don't have the base learning in place, and then apply the right level within the curriculum to fill those gaps or to support the student as they fill those gaps, and then build on top of that. So sometimes it is about going a little bit slower, and when you're teaching online, it's certainly about going slower. Less is more, and being more explicit with your teaching, with how you say things, with your questioning, to really sort of dig down deep into students' understanding of where they are. And that's how learning can be personalized. We all know about, you know, quality questions in the classroom that really sort of, you know, get under the surface and find out if students, you know, have a superficial learning or understanding of the topic, or if they really have deep understanding. And that is not easy to do face to face, and it's certainly not easy to do online. But with the right, you know, with the right teacher presence, and, you know, making sure that students know that they can be in contact with you, that they can ask questions, they have your support even though you may be at a distance from them. And as many of our attendees have mentioned, you know, that good relationship with parents and being open, you know, with parents, building that up so that parents can say, do you know, that subject, that lesson, we could do with a wee bit more support in that, or a little bit more understanding, because it really is, you know, a learning curve for everyone concerned in how you deliver your lessons, making sure that students are engaged in the lessons, that they're brought into that learning arena, and that they, you know, that the lessons really impact on them on a personal level. And it is very easy just to say differentiation will solve that. You know, we talk, there was quite a fad in the UK here for a while, where it was a menu of learning, and questions and activities were put out on a menu, a bit like if you went to I think it is an Australian restaurant, one that sells lots of chicken and different variations of spices. And you would have had a mild and a medium.
I don't think Nando's is Australian.
Is it not? Okay.
No.
Where is it from? I don't know.
I don't know.
I thought it was Australian, but happy to be proved wrong. And you would have variations of spicy task. And that was the differentiation, you know, and it was the challenge for students. Could they cope with something a little spicier? But really, was that personalized learning? Not necessarily, unless the tasks that were set within each of those levels of spiciness were, you know, not just differentiated in terms of a question that's a little bit harder, you know. So I'm hoping someone in our comments can tell me where Nando's is actually from. Quite disappointing.
I do. There's a whole lot of people Googling right now. Right, there's a whole lot of people Googling.
Oh.
What I would say in that space, though, is that I think that there is absolutely a space to facilitate what I refer to as personal interest projects. So, and that whole personalization by input. So whilst I acknowledge that whole idea of the menu approach may not always be the right approach, I actually think, to use a really bad phrase, I don't think we should throw baby out with bathwater, because I do think that there is some value in an approach like that. And I think sometimes as teachers, I mean, how many times have you invested, maybe this is just me, how many times have I invested more time in lesson preparation than actually in the delivery of that lesson? You know, as a new grad, I was sometimes 2x or 3x prep time versus delivery time. And so in a journey like this, where we're all new grads in essence, we're all starting out, we need to harness what we know about working smarter, not harder, in order to do it. And so that whole idea of what sort of outcomes lend themselves to a personal interest project? What sort of outcomes lend themselves to, because personal interest project addresses that challenge of engagement as well, where I struggle to know if my kids are engaged at home. I know that there are things in the classroom that don't engage them, but I don't know about that when they're not in my classroom face to face, or we're not having regular interaction. But what we do know is that if we can somehow frame up some personal interest project, then all of a sudden what we will do is hopefully help start something that lights that fire of learning, if you like, and they continue with it on because they've got their own motivation. Now, you have started a little bit of a, we'll call it debate here. Nando's is Portuguese, a few people are saying, but there's also a claim that it started in Johannesburg. So I am not going to enter into this debate whatsoever. I'm just going to step back and say, Nando's, that's what you were talking about, and we'll go from there. But I don't think that anyone is saying that it's from Australia, Beverly. So just,
all right.
just there.
At least you know, that was the teacher in me. I was just making sure that people were listening to me. So you're all awake. That's great.
So I do think that, you know, there's the real importance to think about, can we personalize by input? So can we think about the outcomes of learning? Can we personalize by the input rather than, because I think often, or can we personalize by the output, I should say, rather than by the input? I think sometimes we personalize or differentiate, acknowledging they're different things, personalize and or differentiate by input. And so that has a huge impact on us as teachers and workloads, because I've got to personalize or differentiate for this group and this group and this group and this group. Whereas if I step back and think about my outcomes and what I'm trying to achieve, is there a way that I can personalize or differentiate by output, by what the student does and how they approach it? And I think that's really important. The other thing,
and that differentiation nearly becomes the support to ensure that students have the opportunities to personalize their to engage in personalized learning. And then there's the opportunity there for them to showcase as well, because they can see themselves as being assessed on their capabilities and how well their particular project has progressed, as opposed to, you know, every student looking at the same country and then thinking, I should have included that, or his diagram looks better than mine. So, you know, students look at themselves and how they can better themselves in their learning, and I think that's really vital in education.
We're going to jump onto that in a second. So we're going to talk about the assessment. Before we do, Catherine has cleared up for us the debate. Nando's serves Portuguese chicken or Portuguese food, but the chain is originally from South Africa. So there you go. So we've solved all the problems today, so we're all good there.
And we're not necessarily promoting any one restaurant chain either. Should mention that.
Other fast food restaurants are available, we should say at this point. I think one of the other things that I would say in terms of that, thinking about how you maintain continuity and thinking about how you use things, and there's a great question come in about differentiation that I want to jump into in a second. But one thing I would say is think about that parental engagement space. Stephen said to us earlier that he feels like he's built a stronger relationship, and that's great with parents. And I think we all have. I think across the board, everyone feels like they've engaged parents. We know that one of the biggest concerns of parents out there just now is that their kids have fallen behind through this homeschooling time. We know every parent we speak to, surveys we do, and it's not just us as a company, every other company and every other school out there tells us the same. Yet we know as educators, you know, we've got people like John Hattie and others who have come out and said actually the evidence to suggest that they'll have missed out is negligible. But we've got that parental concern. Parents want to help. The vast majority of our parents want to help. They don't know how to help often, and they often are time poor. You know, even I know, you know, Beverly mentioned it. I was working from home. I have been working from home since March. Got 3 kids. My wife works. It was a hothouse. Like it was difficult. It was challenging. Tempers were frayed. Emotions were high. It was hard and oppressive at points. But what some of the best practice or best examples of things that I've observed or heard about are things like giving the parents the tools to make the learning real. And I'm not saying this to put extra work on people. Maybe it's something that you can already find. There's some great examples out there. I find Twitter really helpful to get good examples of things. But there's a whole lot of examples out there on Twitter of practical workbooks or kind of lists of things that you can send home that parents can do, that they can do to make them feel like they're adding value to their students' learning, but also to contribute to what's going on. So, I might not manage as a parent to get my kid to sit down for 2 hours a day because I'm doing this, that, or the other. But what we could do is give them some ideas to do it. And I think there's a great comment here. Parents need to recognise we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and I think most of the parents do. We say, we acknowledge that for everything else, and there's an element of when it comes to education, what does it look like to acknowledge that we're in the middle of a global pandemic? Well, the first thing is to acknowledge that everything that we've always done is not going to be possible. Firstly, we are trying to get through, but we also don't want our kids to be disadvantaged for the rest of life in some respects. So there's a real balance to be had, and so parents need to be helped to help their child. And sometimes it's just about them feeling like they're doing something. The vast majority of them just need to feel like they're doing something. And so there's some packs out there that could be really helpful, some really useful packs in Twitter and LinkedIn and other social media sites that were just some ideas to use. How as teachers we often do things with our own children that other parents wouldn't necessarily do, just because that's the way our brains think. Include our kids in measuring and weighing when we're cooking, for example. But we don't necessarily think about, other parents don't necessarily think about that. We think about how we can ask some questions after we've watched a movie that will help them to synthesize information and articulate and all those things. But other parents don't necessarily do it. So it doesn't have to be long, convoluted, really involved tasks, but there are some things that you could really do and really kind of help support the parents. I think there's a question here, Beverly, around differentiation when we've got specific physical disabilities, so low vision or low hearing, because most of the differentiation that happens in classrooms is real time in that space. It's one-to-one. It's about a physical adaptation. It's about adjusting the environment to make that happen. Any thoughts around that? I've got a few. I don't want to.
I read that question and I thought that was a really interesting one because when we talk about differentiation or learning needs, we automatically go to that student who, I don't want to say is slow to learn, but has learning learning difficulties in assimilating information. And we don't often think about those students who have visual difficulties or hearing, auditory difficulties, or even just physical difficulties. And quite often at this moment in time, those are the students who really benefited from their classroom assistant, who really benefited from the physio that was able to come into school, was benefited from those external agencies that came in to really sort of give additional support. And there are great resources out there for those students, but I would say primarily your best resource is going to be their parent. And that parent will have benefited from the time that the student was in school because it gave them some space to do things that they needed to do. So they're going to be probably under a lot more pressure to support their child, possibly work and keep house as well. So building up a good relationship with that parent, which I would imagine has already been there even before the pandemic took place, because those are the parents that we spend more time with. Those are the parents that would be in more discussion with, just surrounding their child and the needs of their child, and the education plans that we would put in place for those students. So again, make instructions simple. Don't, if it's a visual, don't overload. These are things that you're going to know anyway. Keep it simple. There's resources like Immersive Reader, which are fantastic. You can read the text back to the student, and does so in a pretty good way. Mathletics itself, is some of the things that we're developing there. There will be a reader included in that just to help students. Choosing the right font size within activities will be really beneficial. Just think about what your student needs and what their whether it's visual or audio, and make the things more accessible. There's a wealth of information online. If you look up accessibility tools, there's a lot of add-ons for web browsers that can benefit students. And it may be things like being able to provide a laptop or a digital device for that student, a set of headphones so that they can really focus on their learning. I'm going to take a moment and just look back over the question to make sure that I am.
I might jump in while you do, because I think there's a couple of things I would say on the back foot. I agree with everything you've said. I think I've been doing a little work or having some conversations with schools and teachers who have a high percentage of non-English speaking background homes where English is a second language for these students, and some students are high functioning with their English, some are less high functioning, and I think one of the things I would say in all of this, whether we're dealing with a physical disability or English as a second language, think about what has worked for them in the past. So we're thinking about a physical disability. We've strengthened that partnership with parents. So parents, there should be more communication. Think about how we can actually find out from the parents what works, how we can help them, what we can give them, what resources might work, and really strengthen that partnership. And I think then, in terms of the backgrounds where English is not the first language or English is not spoken at home, it depends on how the age of the student, and it depends on how functioning or how well functioning their English is, because often they can be used and they are used to translate already at home. So therefore, that can be relied on. There are tools out there, Google Translate and so on, can help both with spoken translation and written translation. And I think that all of the challenges, and someone asked, what about parents who are not overly educated themselves? All of these challenges are challenges that we have to navigate. There's not a silver bullet for them. What about these parents who are not engaged? What about the parents who see it as the school's job to educate, and that's what I send them to school to do, and you need to do it? All of these are challenges, and I think back to the point earlier about us acknowledging that we're in the middle of the global pandemic. We can only do as teachers what we can do with what we have: resources, parental engagement, student engagement, and so on. We can only do the best with what we have. And I think one of our weaknesses collectively as teachers, and I'll own this if no one else will, is that we push ourselves to do too good a job because we know what's at stake. So there's that, we place this burden of expectation on ourselves to get it absolutely perfectly right. And then we get into a situation like this in the middle of a pandemic where it's uncharted territory, but we find it really hard to justify the inequality of a disengaged parent, the inequality of the lack of resourcing for this family or parent. And we can all stand here, I can stand here and acknowledge that and agree with you. But we have what we have, and we can only do what we can do, and there is a limit with what we can do, and that's really important for us to acknowledge, because I think that it's fundamentally important for us to do it. And I think, just a great point to wrap up this section before we talk a bit more about assessment intentionally. There's a whole question just coming. I've got a large percentage of at-risk students. Parents are disengaged and struggling to cope. How can I reach those students when there is no family support? That is, for me, the fundamental challenge of COVID-19 homeschooling that we find ourselves in. There's not an educational challenge. Yes, there is, but the educational challenge can be addressed and fixed, and gaps can be filled as we get into whatever normal means. And I think we are talking about normal at some point. Normal might be a hybrid model of learning, it might be a flipped model of learning, it might be a changed model, but we will get into something that is a new normal. At the moment, in a second period of lockdown, at home learning and teaching, all these at-risk students who have just been home for 16, 17, 18 weeks, go back home, and how do we get to them? How do we reach them? I think that's a challenge, and I don't necessarily have an answer other than do what you can to connect with them. And sometimes it's that, you know, and yeah, there might not be computers at home. There might not be parents who are prepared to sit down and get their kid to work, but there are mobile devices, and there are the ability to watch things. And maybe it's just a video. Maybe you can connect with your students through a video that you upload onto your LMS or onto YouTube or wherever, where the parent can hand it to them and let them watch it. And that could be the way to reach your student. That can be a way to connect with them. You're not getting any connection in return, and that's really difficult for us, but that's a way to connect with them. Maybe read a story, maybe do something depending on the age group of the student, but look for ways to send opportunity out, even if you're not sure whether that opportunity is taken up. You can't, you know, in our classroom, we can do everything we can to not only take, I'm using really bad old kind of phrases today, we can do everything we can to both take the horse to water and make it drink in our classrooms. You know, we have a whole load of power over the horse and the water. All we can do here is take the horse. We can't make it drink water, and Beverly's laughing at my really bad
I really am.
examples. But it's true, you know, there's more control. We have more influence in our classroom than we do in our home. So we can only provide the opportunities. We can't necessarily do whatever we can. And another example here is what we've tried. One school here has tried to record teachers speaking over the top of PowerPoints when they type PowerPoints. Another great example. There's some great tools out there. You know, a tool like Soapbox, for example, which lets you screen record and talk at the same time, and it films you as well if you've got a webcam. It's great, and it's free of charge, and it produces the video that you can just send a link to straight away. Like it's great. There's some good tools out there. That's really important.
We have schools here, I haven't spoken to some teachers, where there's not even 50% of students have been engaged in their learning, or evidence, should I say. Maybe work has been set, but no response from over 50% of students since March. And that in itself is quite worrying, because we have, you know, educationally, we don't know where those students are. Socially, we don't know where they are. Emotionally, many of those students are not from high socioeconomic backgrounds. They're from disadvantaged backgrounds. Social workers are having difficulty connecting with families at the moment here as well, because our lockdown has improved a little bit. There's a little bit more freedom, but during at least the school year, there was no connection at all. And you know, authorities are very concerned here about the state of you know, what schooling will be like, but also, you know, where these students are, how safe are they? So, you know, that has to be factored into the equation as well. The idea of screen recording is one that has been used very effectively with some schools here. The likes of PowerPoint, you can screen record, you have your audio and you have your subtext as well. And I think it actually has quite a nice function to you know, tutor you through, I think as a coach, on-screen coach it's maybe called, but for teachers who are maybe not as confident at recording themselves or you know, videoing a lesson, it actually will play your text to you on screen, and you can read your text and sound a little bit more confident in what you're doing if it's your first or second time. Many teachers don't need to use it after a little while, but at the start it can be reassuring. One really good example that I have come across in from a teacher who has been putting out her lessons here is using Sway. And I know I'm talking about a certain type of tool here, but it has worked really well, because what she has done is if anybody's not familiar with Sway, it's a bit like creating a website. It's a bit like a PowerPoint online. So you build up these little cards of text, and you can input pictures and images. You can add audio. You can add in videos, whether those are videos made yourself, or you found online. You can add in other web links, and that's really effective as well, but also QR codes. And you can have a screen, this sort of rolling screen for as long as much information as you desire. But teachers have been putting those together here for possibly a week's worth of learning experiences for their students, and linking them into whether there's differentiated tasks where students can pick the task that is best for them. So it might not be necessarily to do with intensity of or difficulty of work, but more to do with intensity of work and how much time the student has to be able to focus on their task. So they're still learning, but they maybe have a 20-minute session or a 10-minute session as opposed to 40 minutes, again, depending on the age of the student. And many households, we have to realize as well, there might be one device. You can hear my husband typing in the background now, I'm sure. He has started work. But there could be, contested space. There could be students who are, trying to learn with the TV on in the background, and it could be parents arguing, or an older brother or sister arguing, or younger siblings crying. So the whole setup for learning has changed. But the likes of a Sway, which you can embed video, audio, whatever you want into, has been particularly effective because all students are reached through that if they have access to it. But as Alan, you've said, the responsibility is on the teacher to provide learning experiences that are suited to the students, and hope that they will be able to engage with them. And just because you don't think your students are accessing does not mean you stop providing.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I think that we also, just in terms of a comment that someone's just made, we have to work within the restrictions of our school. Some schools have said no videos have to be made. Some schools have done various things, and far be it for me to comment on whether I agree or disagree with those restrictions are there, and you have to fall within them. But there's absolutely work within the parameters that you have. And look, I'm really crucially aware of time. I'm aware that it's 5:24 where I am, and we promised we finish at 5:30. I do want to make a few comments, closing remarks on assessment, which I feel like we touched on but didn't explicitly touch on, and then wrap up, because I want to finish on time as best I can. Not that ever my lessons ever finish on time, but I'm going to try hard here. I think one of the things I'd say about assessment, I know that with all the teachers that I have spoken to over the weeks and months of this, assessment is an increasing concern. It becomes more and more of a concern. How do I assess authentically? How do I make sure there hasn't been tampering, so to speak, with those assessments, and so on and so forth. And I think there's a few things I would say in that. Firstly, assessment, the purpose of assessment is to prepare for the next set of learning. It's not necessarily to validate learning that's happened, because that's what it does, but that's not the purpose of it. Assessment as learning, or assessment for learning, is all about preparing for the next part of the journey. And we know that standardized testing and end of year exams and all this stuff has changed in many ways the look and feel of assessment. But assessment has never been about validating learning that's happened. It's about understanding what's happened so as to prepare for the next bout of learning. And I think that's important to know, because I think it's important for our parents to feel and hear that as much as we can, so that they don't feel like they have to rescue their students. So my kid couldn't do that, so I'll do it for them. And I think in many ways there's a whole load of resources out there, and maybe we should talk more about assessment in our next webinar, but there's a whole load of ways that you could look at using some of those form software that's out there, whether it be Google Forms or the Microsoft equivalent. There's a whole host of forms type things that you could use, or surveys. There's quizzes. There's things like flip grids or online whiteboards that real time could let you do some assessment. There's also the self-assessment piece, and I'm doing a real bad job of actually walking through this because I'm aware of time. One of the things I think is really important, particularly if you've got younger kids, is to help parents know how much intervention they should give, how much they should do for the student and how much they shouldn't. And that may well just be as simple as some symbols that you say, look, if this worksheet or task or whatever has this symbol, then don't support at all, or minimal in parent input. Another symbol that allows for parental input, just something that might give parents an idea of how they can interact and help, because I think there's a real challenge in terms of, I don't think parents are I think most of the time parents are not trying to make their kids look better or to do anything. They're just trying to help them, and the best way to help them is, I'll do this for you. And so we need to equip them not to do it for them, and to know how to do it for them, or how to best support. So like I say, I feel like I've done a really bad job of talking about assessment. We have spoken about it throughout today, but I feel like we've done a really bad job. But we are running out of time, and I do want to commit to finishing at 5:30, like we said, because I think it's really important. I know how busy teachers are, and I know how important the evenings are. On the screen just now should be my email address and my Twitter handle, as well as Beverly's email address and her Twitter handle. I'd love for you guys to connect with us. We've also got a Facebook page set up about remote learning discussions, a place to keep these conversations going. I'd encourage you to join us there. I'd love to hear from you. We want to continue to do these webinars, but only if they're useful, only if they're helpful, only if they're relevant. I don't want to waste your time in talking about things that are not helpful or not useful. So I'd love for you to get in touch with one of us, both of us. Let us know what you think the next webinar should focus in on, how we could have made this one better, what would be useful, what was useful, what wasn't. In the meantime, let me encourage you to remember the importance of looking after yourself. The number of teachers that experience burnout, either formally or informally, in that first bout is really concerning. And this hybrid model that we're about to embark on, that's going to be some remote, some face-to-face, is likely going to go on for as long as it takes us to find a vaccine and get that vaccine introduced. And so sustainability is really important, and looking after yourself, looking after each other, your colleagues, is really important. Boundaries are really important. I know for me, one of the things I'm really bad at is getting up and moving away from my desk when I get to the end of the working day. And it can often be that I'll kind of run away from my desk and eat dinner with my kids and then come back to my desk, and my work day kind of starts at 7 a.m. and finishes somewhere after 10 p.m. because I don't put boundaries in well. And so I think, let me encourage you, look after yourself, because it's really important. It's really significant to keep yourself sustainable. Like I say, I hope it was helpful. Beverly, thank you for getting up early to join us. And then we look forward to connecting with you either on Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook or via email, and look forward to you joining us in the next 3P Learning webinar. Thanks now, bye.
Thank you.